At the edge of the spirit world, within the cradle of an emerald sea, lies a cemetery of sorts, a testament to a tragedy of man and whales. As if back from the grave, these creatures are now our guides through a remarkable journey of rebirth, return, and survival. For thousands of years, human beings have been fascinated by whales. We have worshipped them and slaughtered them, revered them and studied them. Yet despite this fascination, our knowledge of them remains superficial. It is uncertain when, how, or why the ancestors of the whale gradually moved into a purely aquatic environment. What has resulted is a group of mammals totally isolated in time and space from all other terrestrial creatures. 25 million years of evolution separates us. Only recently have we begun to bridge that vast environmental chasm. Freed from the gravity of the land, the whales evolved in an opaque, fluid, and vibration-rich world to become the true ocean beings of the planet. By the time our ancestors resembled tiny, tree-dwelling shrews, the whales and dolphins were already fully developed. For most of our shared history, our relationship with the whales has been a distant one. If a memory of our often brutal nature remains behind the eyes of these gentle creatures, it is rarely, if ever, shown. Rather, our first furtive attempts to enter the whale's domain seem greeted with curiosity and a longing for communication and understanding. For our own part, we wish more and more that these creatures prove to be similar to ourselves, citing their huge brains as proof of intelligence and awareness. But an elemental gulf continues to separate us. These whales and dolphins are the true perfect masters of their chosen realm. Our few encounters with them, far out to sea or in the deep, are fleeting passings. Occasionally, these creatures seem to seek out the company of man, or at least proximity to him. These rare and special gathering places of whales and humans are scattered wide around the world. One such place, lying off Canada's western shore and facing the wild North Pacific, is Vancouver Island. A length of 300 miles makes it the largest, most diversified island off the Pacific coast of North America. It is a land of unpredictable mood, temperament, and change. For 10,000 years, this quiet land of sea and shore has been the ancestral home of the Northwest tribes, the people of the whale. Within the Indians' pantheon of animal spirits and spiritual guides, the whale is amongst the most powerful. To obtain the hereditary right to utilize the whale's image as a totem figure or family crest is an honor to be proudly guarded. Only the Thunderbird, mythical slayer of whales, had the power and knowledge to vanquish the lords of the undersea world. For a man to obtain this power was as much a spiritual quest as it was a hunt for food. The first peoples of this land carefully utilized the resources of the forest to gather the resources of the oceans. The native cedar was their tree of life, providing the basic materials for everything from clothing to canoes. It was their belief that all living creatures were to share in the world equally. The only difference between them was their external appearance. Strip the bird of its feathers, the bear of its fur, or the skin from the whale, and the form would be indistinguishable from the human form. During the winter ceremonial, the spirits of the animal people were brought forth. Beings with the characteristics of both animal and human. The spiritual preparations for dealing with the rest of nature were as important as the physical ones. They were passed down from generation to generation. No other endeavor of the West Coast tribes required more preparation than whaling. The whole community was deeply involved in gaining the cooperation of the beings who lived at the bottom of the sea, the whale people. The whalers themselves prepared for months through physical isolation and hardship, toning their bodies and minds and drawing strength from the elements. At sacred, secret shrines, the necessary power was drawn from the ancestral spirits of the great whalers. Finally prepared, these 8-man crews were ready to hunt, capture, and kill the largest animals on Earth, or be killed in the trying. The special methods and technologies used live on today with their descendants.
The whale hunt, it began by gathering many resources that were needed to do this. Selecting trees for dugout canoes. Normally these fellows would fill the canoe with all of the paddles, harpoon lines, the sealskin floats. But as soon as the harpooner threw the harpoon, every person on board had a job to do.
It was now that each member of the crew would discover if their months of preparation had been sufficient. The kill itself could take days. An injured whale might tow the hunters miles offshore beyond the sight of land. Many crews would never return. To prevent the dead whale from sinking, its lips were sewn together by divers trained in the art from childhood. Now the arduous task of towing the whale to shore began, the whalers calling upon the spirit of their quarry to aid them. Today, tribal elders reminisce about the great whalers and the days of whaling.
He wasn't going to do it out of glory. He wasn't doing it for dominance, but doing it for the benefit of the children and grandchildren, people who were going to benefit from the meat and fat of the whale. The spirituality was really important in that you recognized asking the Creator, let me touch your hand, O Great Spirit.
Then there appeared a being whose power came from man alone. As early as the 1830s, American and European whalers had begun to cruise the grounds of the Northeast Pacific. By the turn of the century, the slaughter had begun in earnest. Unlike their counterparts in the Southern Oceans and Atlantic, who processed their kills at sea, the commercial whalers of Vancouver Island established a network of shore-based stations up and down the coast. During the first onslaught of mechanized whaling, more than 14,000 animals were taken in British Columbia waters. Most of these were humpbacks, but this breed of whalers were not selective and took whatever could be found. Toothed and baleen whales, sperm whales and blues, finbacks and orcas, minke whales and the already rare northern right. Day and night, the machinery of these factories of death ground and cut and sliced and boiled their pitiful fodder down to the component parts. The solids were destined to be fertilizer and chicken feed. The liquids, lamp and lubricating oil, cosmetics, and candles. In order to sustain their profit margins, the whaling companies were forced to build stations and dispatch their fleets further afield. The whale stocks were dwindling, and the flensing decks no longer worked around the clock. The shores of Vancouver Island had become a graveyard of whales, but despite the obvious depletion of the resource, vested interests pursued their disappearing prey with a vengeance. It was during this period that an adventurous 17-year-old joined the whaling fleet as it set out on its first cruise of the season.
And wouldn't you believe it, I was the person up in the lookout barrel when we caught our first whale, and it was the biggest whale ever caught by the ships in that area, and certainly the biggest one of the season. So there was a lot of firsts for me, and I realized that I had very keen eyes and adapted to the trade very well. It was a very messy, very bloody trade, and a little terrifying when you've seen those whales come up, but awful humiliating when you've seen the gun go off and seen what it would do to some of those whales.
Unlike the native whalers, who were discriminate in their hunting practices and sensitive to the obvious signs of nature, the commercial operations continued in an all-out, indiscriminate slaughter that would soon threaten to become annihilation.
Most people are quite concerned with the brutality and the wanton slaying of whales. And they quite often will talk about the Aboriginal whaling as being rather a symbolic thing, that they did no harm, they were wanting just the whale to eat, and they were full of faith and mythology, whereas we were full of rather greed and avarice.
A further 10,000 whales were taken from the waters around Vancouver Island during the latter days of the industry. The carnage continued, but the writing was on the wall for both whales and whalers. Entire population groups had disappeared from the coast, and with the development of cheaper synthetic substitutes, the demand for whale-based products waned. But for some species, it was too late. The mighty blues and sperms seem gone forever, and countless others are rarely sighted. Up and down the coast, at stations like Cayucot, a great whale-killing machine ground to a halt. The fleets were scrapped or auctioned off. The ships lay dry and empty. A barely discernible ruin now, the whaling station at Cayucot is eerily silent, choked and strangled by the forest. It will soon be but a bad memory. Amidst the decay of a few decades, one might imagine the sights, the sounds, the stench that once filled this place. The shouted orders and shrill of whistles, the crash of chain and rending tear as flesh left bone. As the undergrowth drags the last few relics down, they serve as a sad reminder of an era that's best left closed forever. Let its monuments rust and disappear. In a deeper silence, off the ruins of the old slipway, the few skeletal remains of the creatures which fueled the furnace lie buried alongside the tools of their destruction. More than 25,000 whales were killed and processed. Little survives to mark their passing, but we may be sure that the world is a poorer place without them. It was as if a great guardian spirit had abandoned the coast. Coinciding with the destruction of the whales, the native peoples entered a long decline that had begun with first contact. In an attempt to have them adopt European ways, families were separated, customs outlawed, and language suppressed. Villages that had been established for thousands of years lay empty and deserted. A once vibrant and sophisticated culture clung precariously to its heritage for survival. The spirits of old no longer spoke. They seemed asleep in the forest, dreaming of other days, helpless to stop the tide rising around them. Christian missionaries struck down the symbols of the native faith, while museum collectors rushed to steal them. Diseases against which they had no resistance swept in a plague through the coastal tribes. From a pre-contact population of about 100,000, more than 2/3 died, often in agony, on the beach in front of the longhouse. Entire family groups and clans were wiped away forever. Those left behind alive were forced to fight a power stronger and more final than any individual death. Silenced now, the spirit faces stand, their eyes still staring seaward. In sun, serene and calm, only the rafts of uprooted kelp and staggered, stunted trees bear witness to the storms that sometimes rage here. The membrane which separates this so-called Emerald Sea from the deep and verdant forest is a narrow one. Here, where the elements of earth and ocean meet amidst the tidal race, the convoluted coastline stretches for 10,000 miles and more. Much of it remains uncharted. Each year, tens of thousands of travelers transit the inside passage between Vancouver Island and the mainland. From the deck of a liner, passengers gain a distant, general view of the passing coastline. Few would suspect the extent and diversity of this wilderness of forest and sea. Slowing closer to the pace of nature, the possibility of true discovery becomes a reality in a place still virtually unexplored, both above and below the waves. Some of the fastest tidal currents in the world flow through this narrow sea. With oxygen and nutrients in abundance, these cool, clean waters support a rich but fragile environment, inhabited by a community of creatures more colorful and strange than any tropic reef. It is a world of ghostly giants, where the beautiful and bizarre dance together in the darkness. Usually slow-moving bottom dwellers, the poisonous flesh of this giant nudibranch and its smaller hooded cousin acts as a deterrent to most predators. But if threatened, they are galvanized into a defensive behavior, ballet-like in its grace. The lower links in the food chain contrive a diverse array of methods to lure and trap their prey. Some resort to trickery and cannibalism on their own kind, while others, like the fleshy sea pen, rely on hapless victims drifting by. Clinging precariously in the flow, brooding anemones filter the current's race for food. At the turn of the tide, these waters become a swirling storm of plankton. Though primitive and slow-growing, many of these creatures attain immense size and great age. An army of camouflaged scavengers patrol the sea floor. Sporting rainbow armor, the giant Puget Sound king crab has evolved into a formidable predator in its own right, while the blue-clawed hermit stands sentry at the entrance to its borrowed home. Wise it is to be on guard against one of the most unlikely but voracious hunters of this northern sea. Attaining a diameter of more than 3 feet, the multiple-armed sunflower sea star is the scourge of all creatures unfortunate enough to lie in its path. Relying on a single light-sensitive cell at the tip of each arm and thousands of powerful tube feet, this largest of all the sea stars causes the most sedentary of animals to flee for their lives. In a world where the unlikely meets the fantastic in an ongoing battle for survival, the combatants seem to us often alien in their form and otherworldly in their delicate grace. More than 300 species of fish inhabit the waters around Vancouver Island, many of them as exotic in appearance as their invertebrate counterparts. A relative of the sharks and rays, the ratfish flies through its nocturnal range. A red Irish lord, the chameleon of this sea, blends perfectly into its surroundings. Often reaching 6 feet in length, the ling cod is aggressive and territorial towards all intruders. Though more than twice the fish's size, a giant Pacific octopus has made the mistake of wandering too close to the cod's nest and now suffers the consequences. In an attempt to confuse its attacker, the octopus jets away, leaving a smokescreen of ink behind it. Not so easily fooled, the ling cod gets in a final shot as it escorts its unwelcome and perhaps wiser visitor across the border of its dark domain. In the sunlit world of the kelp forest, harbor seals, descendants of creatures that once roamed the land and still retain ties to it, carry on a mainly aquatic existence. So ungainly on land, their close relatives, the resident stellar sea lions, are masters of speed, grace, and control when in their chosen element. Powerful predators, the bulls often weigh in at more than a ton, every ounce of which is used to protect their harems of inquisitive females. Traveling in pods of hundreds through a golden sea, the porpoise and dolphins are a class of mammal which have given up the land forever. At the head of this tribe is the top ocean predator, the orca, or killer whale. Perhaps the most maligned and misunderstood of all the whales, both its name and reputation are totally undeserved. To be found in all of the world's oceans, the orca population off Vancouver Island numbers about 300 animals, separated into 2 distinct clans of residents and transients. Each pod is comprised of a number of family units, overseen by a dominant female. The maternal bonds are strong, with the young often staying with their mothers well into adulthood, or until they form their own matrilineal groups. Over a lifetime, a breeding female may produce 4 to 6 young. When her reproductive days are over, she may survive within the pod for as long as 20 years, where she will fill a role similar to that of a human grandparent. The orca is the true social animal. Though all of the orca's various behaviors are no doubt related to feeding or communication, it is sometimes very easy to believe that perhaps they are simply jumping for joy. Working cooperatively along the shore, these resident animals employ a number of methods to herd salmon and other fish species. Sporadically slapping their flukes or flippers against the water's surface may serve to drive cornered fish into a state of exhaustion, at which point the orcas swoop in to devour their prey. A 3.5-ton male can consume up to 5% of its body weight in a day. They have no natural enemies except man and other orcas. It was a mere 30 years ago that local fishermen complained so loudly about them that a machine gun was installed to kill or drive the whales away. It has suffered more abuse than any ocean creature, with the exception of the shark. In the company of their elders, the young learn the techniques of the hunt. Breaching is another method of herding their prey into the shallows. Strength and a cooperative hunting strategy enables the orca to literally drive its cold-blooded victims into the mouths of pod members. In addition to their power and speed, the orca's place as top predator is ensured by its ability to echolocate and communicate. Amongst the resident whales, vocalization levels rise as hunting activity increases. If visibility fails, the the animals receive a picture in sound of the obstacles and prey. There are one group of whales, however, who hunt in silence. Known as transients, they roam the coast in small groups. They feed on all types of marine mammals. Presumably, their sparing use of sound allows them to successfully stalk their mammalian prey. Their main quarry are sea lions, which they will often torment for hours, cat-and-mouse style, before finally drowning and devouring them. They are opportunistic feeders. More than 80 species of birds, fish, reptiles, marine and land mammals have been found amongst their stomach contents. A pair of white-tailed deer are wise to be wary while island hopping in killer whale country. In a behavior known as spy hopping, the whales gain a perfect view of their above-water surroundings. Even along the shoreline, prospective prey are not totally out of harm's way. Orca have been known to leave the water in order to pluck their victims from the beach. Though rare, these chance encounters serve to illustrate how narrow is the band of territory which separates the creatures of the land and sea. Here, where mountain and forest rise directly from the ocean floor, it is impossible to deny their connected and dependent natures. On the west coast of Vancouver Island can be found the evidence of one success story of sorts concerning man and whales. During the late 19th century, the Pacific gray whale was hunted to virtual extinction by Japanese and American whalemen. From an historical population of about 15 to 20,000 animals, no more than 2,000 remained at the turn of the century, and numbers continued to decline until 1937, when a few of the whaling nations agreed to give the species partial protection. Though the subject of limited hunts by American, Canadian, and Soviet interests during the 40s and 50s, the gray whale has made a remarkable recovery. Its numbers now stand at approximately 14,000 animals, and there is a movement afoot to have them removed from the list of endangered or threatened species. If this occurs, the gray whale will become the first large cetacean that has been endangered and recovered under protection. As remarkable as the gray whale's return from the brink of extinction is its incredible 10,000-mile annual migration, one of the longest of any mammal on Earth. Early each year, newly pregnant females leave the breeding grounds in Mexico's Baja California. They are followed about 2 weeks later by mature males and juveniles. Finally, by late March, the females with calves are moving past the coast of Central California. The majority of the whales are bound for a summer-long feast in the Bering and Chukchi Seas. But many pause along their route for days and weeks around the rugged shores of Vancouver Island. Here, the gray whales engage in a feeding behavior peculiar to their species. By driving their jaws into the sea floor, they scoop up about a wheelbarrow full of sand, mud, and food at a time. This mixture is then strained through their baleen plates. As they range across the bottom, the expelled mouthfuls mark their course. A gray whale is built to eat. In a 5-month period, a single animal will ingest an incredible 130,000 pounds of prey. During this summer-long feast, the whales increase their body weight by 15 to 30%. In one season, each whale will process almost 60 acres of bottom sediment. The gray whale's feeding habits have no doubt contributed to its remarkable recovery. They have had a reliable source of food for a long time. Lately, concerns have been raised for their continued success under the threat of oil spills, ocean dumping, and industrial runoff. Because of its unique feeding technique, the gray whale is a tremendous indicator of the health of the entire ocean system. Many questions need to be answered in order to judge the effects of pollutants on the gray whales and their environment. After a feeding gray whale has passed through an area, the seafloor seems devastated. But in actual fact, the whale is responsible for clearing space, which can later be colonized by the drifting larvae of its prime prey. In this way, it helps to maintain the community of animals which it exploits. By utilizing an airlift suction device, scientists gather samples of bottom sediments. In addition to determining what the whales are feeding on, they test for traces of pollutants. After a recent, relatively minor oil spill in nearby Washington waters, researchers found traces of hydrocarbons, oil, and grease in every one of 5 whale feeding grounds around Vancouver Island. What might be the long-term effect of these poisons on the whales? Do these toxins reach dangerous concentrations in the tissues of both predator and prey? The answers may be found in the West Coast fishing village of Bamfield. There, the scientists and students at the Bamfield Marine Station study every aspect of marine biology and ecology. What has been determined by scientists is that the major food source of the gray whales, while feeding in the area, are a group of crustaceans called amphipods. These shrimp-like creatures burrow in the millions, a few inches below the sea floor. Because of their numbers, these tiny animals provide the whales with a major source of protein. Recently, however, this critical food source is being threatened from an unexpected quarter. The temperate rainforests of Vancouver Island are the last examples of this ecosystem on the planet. They are one of the most flamboyant and magnificent expressions of life. But they are by no means remote or separated from all the other ecosystems that surround them. Due to their close proximity and connected natures, what is happening in the forest today will affect the oceans tomorrow. Industrial forestry view trees and forests as assembly line parts, as digits in an economic profit equation that lately is equaling 0 for the future. Each year, millions of cubic feet of raw lumber are shipped from Vancouver Island to American, European, and Asian markets. The amounts and methods of this harvest simply cannot be sustained at current levels, and it is easy to draw parallels with the boom times of the whaling trade. Natural forests are self-sustaining and self-repairing. They are a dynamic cauldron of life, co-evolving with fire and water, avalanche and wind. No natural disaster impacts the forests as man does. Man benefits greatly from healthy forests, but the benefits cease when they are misunderstood and redesigned for human purposes. This is not the aftermath of a nuclear bomb or the defoliation of a war zone. This is the devastation wrought to the land by current logging practices. This clear-cut has wiped out thousands of years of genetic heritage. The trees are gone, so too are the birds, insects, and other wildlife. In some places, the very land itself is falling away, lacking the forest's roots to hold it. From the blasted, barren hillsides, a choking, smothering tide flows to the sea. Communities such as Hot Springs Cove live under the threat of an ecological disaster.
I'm a member of the Heshkut band. There are today about 500 of us. We've always lived in this territory, Heshkut territory. We have a hard time convincing the manager of the logging operation over here that this whole land in our territory is precious to us. The big problem that we have is with all the landslides coming down the mountainsides, the steep slopes. Every winter we get 2, 3 landslides. All of that mud comes down, plus all the stumps, and they go down little feeder streams into our spawning beds. And it's starting to fill the bays up. The silt is growing higher and higher on the bottom, and it's smothering the life on the bottom of the ocean. There's that complete ignorance of our way of life. It's money to them. We found out that the loggers were going into our burial caves and desecrating them, stealing things from them. When we first heard about that, we got pretty mad and concerned, so we started certain things in motion that are still going on today. Trying to protect not only our history and our ancestors, but also to protecting our way of life.
Heshkut territory is rich in natural resources. While drawing on the knowledge of old to preserve them, the tribe has also adopted modern scientific methods of management and protection. In secluded bays and harbors all along the coast, it appears as if a great swirling snowfall has cast a white blanket across the bottom. This is not the result of some freak winter beneath the waves, for each settling crystal in this subsea storm holds the promise of life. As it always has, the whale's migration has coincided with that of the herring, which have ventured into shallow water to mate and cast their immense egg masses upon the kelp. In one special secret cove, set in the rugged shore, the herring swarm in silver clouds. Here, the roe attaches itself to the stalks and leaves of the native eelgrass. As growth begins, storms and high tides uproot the grass. Great rafts of roe and vegetation are gathered up and driven onto the beaches. In the spring sunshine, the eggs will continue to incubate within the mounds of weed. Another series of tides and storms will wash the hatching roe back out to sea. Every inch of shore has become a nursery. For many years now, there has been no commercial herring fishing here. As a result, this beautiful place is returning slowly to its natural state. The whales stop once more along their way to gorge themselves on roe. A host of seabirds also gather here to feed. The roe is the staff of life to many species. It is central, too, to the very existence of the Heshkut people. Even their name is derived from the roe on the grass. They have taken back their power as guardians of their resources. They face the world with the tools of technology and the teachings of the ages. More delicate and precious than any string of pearls, the developing eggs thrive under their careful stewardship and protection.
The next tide that we have in this harbor here is gonna take all this roe that has incubated and hatched, take it out, wash it out in about maybe, let's say, between three weeks to a month. Wash it all out. Around full moon? Around the full moon, or after the full moon. And we'll be able to monitor the rest of the herring next year to see how much will return.
Traditionally, the few settlements scattered along Vancouver Island's western shore have relied almost exclusively on the revenues generated by the logging and fishing industries. Lately, in the west coast towns of Ucluelet and Tofino, the return of the gray whales marks the beginning of a busy tourist season. With an ever-increasing influx of eager city dwellers, these two communities now depend more and more on the tourist dollar. Some 30,000 visitors will come to watch the whales at the height of their spring migration. The local people are ready to capitalize on this fascination with whales.
You need an extra key just to goodie.
Of all ages, from all walks of life, the people gather for a chance to see, perhaps close up, a creature which only a few years ago we hunted to the very edge of extinction. What is it we hope to see? Is it more than just an adventure for an amateur naturalist? The fascination with whales has taken on almost mystical proportions. These animals, for so long viewed as terrifying and strange, now draw people to them like no other creature on Earth.
Oh yeah, there's one right up at about 1 o'clock.
Is there? Headed exactly the direction that he's supposed to be going, so he's not really bothered by us. It's just that he has a bit of a difficult breathing pattern to work with.
One of the things we're very concerned with in the whale watching industry is that the whales aren't abused in any way. It's interesting to note that people seem to look at the whale as the icon of the whole environmental movement. It's surprising how knowledgeable they are. It's been a good crowd, and it also, more importantly, it gives me an opportunity to spend a lot more time with the whales and observe their habits for my own personal interest. In Tofino here we have a very strong environmental movement. We kind of consider ourselves the protest capital of the world. We seem to be in the news standing in the way of something or the other. I'm just kind of nestled into the trees here is a weeping cedar woman. She's shedding rivers of tears for the devastation that's been done to her province's resources. And her one hand up says stop, and her finger pointing at the ground says think of the earth. But she is a traditional native welcome figure, so her overall message to the world is welcome to Clayoquot Sound, stop and think of the earth. Our most recent field of interest has been the movement of the killer whales, and we've set up a network in Clayoquot Sound. Everybody seems to have jumped on the bandwagon. Well, that's actually the only way we could make it work. Anybody traveling about on the water, when they spot a killer whale, they make note of the time and location, direction of travel, and we've been told that it's the most detailed monitoring of killer whale movements that has ever been done anywhere in the world.
With the resources and funding of professional biologists and whale researchers spread thin, they have come more and more to rely on the reports and input of those who spend their lives on the sea. Cruising British Columbia waters year-round, one such dedicated amateur is Captain John DeBoick of the charter boat Clavella.
Yeah, Graham, we've got A23s and Sharky and her calf here right along the shore. Just playing around and rolling.
No, I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay, they were quite a ways up there. Yeah, I see about 7 or 8 animals out center channel right off the point here, behind you by about 3/4 of a mile. I guess that's probably them.
Oh, okay, yeah, they may have fallen behind. I haven't really been paying attention since we got on these guys.
Yeah, I'm just going to mark these guys' position now on the GPS and get some kind of a speed reading. Look like they're just moseying along about 2.5 knots, but I'll get it on the GPS.
Each individual animal can be identified by the particular shape of its dorsal fin. Around Vancouver Island, a total of 14 separate pods have been recorded in this manner. This allows researchers to trace orca bloodlines back over several generations. As a result, the behaviors and interactions of the various pods are now the subject of a massive body of work. For John DeBoick, the rigors of shipboard life are inconsequential when stacked against the benefits.
Yeah, I bought the Clavella in 1980 with the idea of cruising around the coast and diving, finding shipwrecks, seeing a bit of the coast. But I started encountering marine mammals, and more interesting still was the research that was going on into marine mammals in BC. It's become something of a passion with me. I'm an amateur researcher, but I make up for my lack of formal training with lots of enthusiasm, and it really makes my day when I see one of these orcas swimming along, and I can convince the people on board who are usually more interested in scuba diving to come along with me while I take some photos and figure out who it is and where they're going. The research that's going on is finding out all sorts of things about the family structure, the social structure of the orca, and some of the stuff that we're finding out is leading to further and further research into the acoustics, the vocalizations, and the genealogy and such.
For all our research and good intentions, how much closer are we to a real respect and understanding of these still threatened creatures? Too often, it seems, we are intent on proving that these animals possess human characteristics and therefore are more deserving of life. Perhaps the lesson to be learned from the whales is more about ourselves than of them. That our children, too, will have a world of whales, we would be wise to heed the spirit dancer's prayer. O Great Spirit, Lord of the undersea world, let me hear you speak. Instruct and lead me. Protect me. Great Spirit, Maker of long life, friend, do not be overcome by the one who does as he pleases to us. Have mercy for me, so that nothing evil may befall me. May I be the inheritor of all your power and the guardian of your wishes. Touch my hand, Great Spirit, that I may avoid all trouble and evil among my fellow man. Show me your secrets and your qualities. Enter my heart and be as I am here, a dream ghost. Hide not your face from me, but stand by me and call me brother always. Curse only those who wish to cause death or take away our freedom. Stand by me in the forest, O Great Spirit. Should you be overcome, the land and sea and all the beings there will die away forever. Imagine an ocean without whales. If it were truly possible to communicate with cetacean intelligence, what message would we bring? What knowledge could pass between us? Can we learn to accept the connected nature of the planet that we share and become the guardians of the whales? These creatures in the sea are more our brothers and sisters than any other, and we suspect that there is a mind beneath the waters.